First of all, I think Benjamin, Samuel, what he's trying to do is a very, very noble attempt. There is a big need among Chinese-speaking saints, especially Chinese-speaking brothers, to be able to speak with English and to be able to communicate. And for a long time, a lot of saints have realized that there is such a need. But it's very difficult. To change the way we speak. And when we talk about difficulty in fellowship and in blending, some of that is, of course, due to the disposition, due to various factors, and even sometimes we say culture is a big factor. Yet culture is very much blended in and mixed with language. And if you cannot communicate freely in language, then that difficulty in communication itself becomes a barrier in blending. And I am very, very aware of this challenge. And there are very few brothers in the recovery who can be an effective bridge between the English-speaking part of the body and the Chinese-speaking part of the body. I'm sure that the other languages also face those challenges, but the other languages are not as big. The Chinese language and the Chinese believers, the numbers is so big, both in the Western world and in the Eastern world, that it's a real challenge to be able to blend together as one block, And it's you can say that, well, the English-speaking saints, they have to learn to overcome this challenge by taking their initiative also to try to drop what they have and try to learn. But how are you going to expect English-speaking people to drop the English language to try to learn the Chinese language? I mean, unless the world turns around in 10 years, that the Chinese language become the universal language, which I don't think it will ever happen. And if it doesn't happen, then at the present moment, the universal language is the English language, whether you like it or you don't like it. And that being the case, it is very important that different languages would be up to speed with the English language. Now, so I think to have a week to try to improve English is good. It's very good, and I hope more brothers would want to do that. I don't know how much that can help. I don't know. But to do something is better than to not do anything. So first of all, I commend Samuel for trying.
Amen. Amen.
Even to try it is, it takes a lot of courage to try to do that. Then, of course, for you to spend one whole week to try to improve your language is also very commendable. Whether it be useful or how useful it will be to you, and how much it would change your communication ability, I don't know. But we do our best. So that's the first thing. Now, in trying to be able to have an effective blending together in the church life, we have two areas of activities. One is in the public meetings, and one is in the private fellowships. These two areas. And we need to strive to be able to overcome the language difficulty in both areas. First, the public area. And public area mainly means prophesying. And from what I'm hearing, a lot of what you're doing is learning how to prophesy, give a message in the public. And you want to deliver something as much as possible that people would not be conscious that there is a language barrier as much as possible. So your pronunciation, that comes into play, because if you pronounce something not right or strange, immediately it draws the attention of those that listen to the speaking to that way of pronunciation, and it's a distraction. And everybody has to learn, so when a Spanish-speaking person gets up and he speaks with a Spanish accent, I should not be distracted by his Spanish accent. I should listen to what he's trying to speak. That's true. Everybody needs to learn that. But the fact remains that when you speak and your pronunciation is not it's not good or is too strange, it draws attention. It draws attention. And you don't want your pronunciation to draw attention. That's the main thing. If your pronunciation becomes a point of focus of attention, it distracts whatever you want to speak. Then, of course, grammar also falls within this category. If you speak with wrong grammar, then people pick it up. And when it's being picked up, nobody tries to criticize, but it distracts. Like, for example, for Chinese, many times we drop the article. Church, Christ. Well, Christ has no article, but church. We love church, and we love brothers and sisters. And, it's just that little bit that just, like the road, you have a little bump, and then the bump causes people to feel uncomfortable. Those are the small things, and those I think should be it is possible to correct these, although it takes practice. Even those takes practice, and I mean. For example, we know third person singular. Verb should have an S to it, He stands, she drinks. But there's no such thing in the Chinese language, and then you said, she drink, and then it may escape some, but to those who are comfortable with the English language, then immediately it becomes a distraction. And but those are kind of things that even those that have been speaking English for a long, long time they can neglect. So again, that's a matter of practice. So those technicalities alone takes a lot of practice. But I'm glad at least we try, because if you don't try, then you never change.
Right.
But in public speaking, then there are way of the way we present ourselves, or the way we speak, and Asian people especially, I don't know why, they don't speak well in public. Generally, they don't. They're not. Like in English-speaking schools, Western schools, the kids, they get up and then they raise their hand and they want to say something and then they say it. And they grow up, I think, more easy for them to express themselves than Asian people in general. I don't know why. And I'm not saying this general, I'm saying this only in a generalized way. And then, so when we try, the Chinese saints, they try to learn to speak in public. It's usually they speak in a way that is very different from the way they speak in private. So I have noticed that some of the Chinese speaking brothers, when they get up and they speak in English, and their speaking is sort of very unnatural. It's unnatural even to them. And that's beyond grammar, beyond pronunciation, and beyond manner of speaking. It's, I don't know how to describe it. It's just, and not used to public speaking, maybe. So, because of that, because you're not used to it, when you're forced to, what you do becomes sort of unnatural. And when it's unnatural, it becomes a distraction again. And so our goal in speaking in public is try to eliminate as much as possible all the distracting factors, so that people can hear what we're talking without those distractions. They can hear the message. They can hear the content of what we want to say. Now, those are the superficial. The more intrinsic matter that needs to be dealt with is the thought, is the logic, is the way you present your points. And it seems that when we speak in Chinese, a lot of the way of expression we can get by very easily, but when you try to convert that into English, then it just becomes alien. It becomes foreign. And how do you deal with that? I don't know. But I would say this. As much as possible, try to stick with the Word, the Bible, the outlines, the ministry points, and don't try to get off from it too much. I think that's safe, and that's good for a start. Let me give you an example. The Chinese, very often, they can give a small illustration, like this, like that, or try to cut out as much as possible these illustrations, because those illustrations can cause misunderstanding. And sometimes, if it doesn't cause misunderstanding, it can cause a distraction. And Okay, so Dick Taylor, he gets up and he can give an illustration about playing baseball, running from first base to second base, blah, blah, blah. Or Ron Kangas can give an illustration about how he talks to his dog. But I think for the Chinese brothers, it's safer that they don't get off from the truth points at the beginning.
Sure.
Because once you get off from it and you make illustrations, sometimes those illustrations difficult to explain, and sometimes they can cause misunderstanding.
Yeah. It's true.
And so what you're doing, trying to take an outline and try to speak from the outline
Yes.
is a good start.
Great.
And that's one thing I can think of. And in practicing our speaking. And it's also easier. I'll give you an example. During the co-workers meeting before the ICARO, we asked the Chinese brothers to share, the co-workers to share something. Okay, Brother Wu is sharing Chinese, Lin Hong is sharing Chinese, and then Zhou Fuchu is sharing it. Now, when he speaks in Chinese, he speaks very fast, and his thoughts are very clear. But when he tried to speak in English, he stuttered a lot, and it's like he's struggling to get his words out, or struggling to express what he wants to say. Why? I can tell you, I can understand. It's because in speaking language, we don't think twice. What's going on in our mind, then I communicate through my speaking. But when you speak in English for Chinese speakers, it's not like this. It's what is going on in my mind is in Chinese. And then as you speak, you try to convert that Chinese into English. And so it's like the computer is working twice.
Yes.
And because the computer is working twice, you are not as efficient in conveying yourself and conveying your idea. And sometimes you yourself get distracted with what you're speaking. You can't communicate effectively. So what can you do? Well, like Lin Hong and Brother Wu, they prefer to speak in Chinese and then have a translator to translate for them. That's good. I mean, in international communications, every country speak their own language and they have their translator. There's nothing wrong about it. And sometimes that's even better. Sometimes I think that if we don't have the confidence that our communication would be effective, it's better that we speak in Chinese and then have somebody to try to translate for us. because the main thing is it's not just whether I can speak or I cannot speak. It's whether my speaking will become a distraction or will not become a distraction. I don't want my speaking to become a distraction because you don't want people to notice your speaking. You want people to hear the content of what you're trying to deliver. So, for some of us, it may help if instead of trying to speak out from our mind, we write down what we want to say. And then we speak according to what we write down. Usually, our thoughts become more clear, and we communicate more effectively. We're talking about communication. It's a very human thing, but it's strangely in the church life, it's very important. And then communication breaks down, and then fellowship breaks down. And then, you start talking about differences, and, the spiritual understanding, my spiritual understanding. Sometimes it's just pure lack of communication, lack of fellowship. And well, how to address this issue of our way of speaking, our thought, our consideration, our thought life. I don't know, but it's a real issue. So I think that to start off, it's better that we write down what we want to say, and then we speak according to that. And now I move from public speaking to private fellowship, and especially fellowship among brothers and fellowship among co-workers. One thing about Chinese brothers is that they try to be more dramatic in their presentation so that the presentation can impress others. And it works among the Chinese-speaking saints when you try to be dramatic. But it works the other way in many cases when you try to speak in English and you try to be dramatic. What is to try to be dramatic? Well, very hard to describe. You say, it's very, very wonderful. Okay? So very, very wonderful. Suppose in Chinese you say, "Oh, 这个聚会太荣耀." That's everybody feel very comfortable about. But if in English you say, "Well, this meeting is too glorious," then it's sort of like a little bit distracting. And so rather than using hyperboles means exaggerated expression, or dramatic expressions, try to be as factual and as plain as possible. But you have to have something in you to speak it. But in learning to communicate and in fellowship, especially in private fellowship, as much as possible, learn that this is not the same as public speaking. And I see sometimes we try to use the way of expression in public speaking in private fellowship, and it doesn't add to the spirit of, it doesn't add much. It, on the contrary, becomes a distraction. Of course, it goes back to what the Bible says. That是就是是，不是就是不是，再多说出于魔鬼。I don't know what it is in Chinese. That you just speak what there is to speak, and then don't try to impress anyone. Don't try to impress anyone. You may end up more effective because when you try to impress people, what your attempt may become a distraction. So that's another point. But these things that I just talked about is more than just the technicals, the grammar, the pronunciation, the manner of speaking. It's more than these. But it's good to start out from these. The pronunciation, the grammar, and the manner of speaking. It's good to start from that. But in order to be, see, my wife is Caucasian. So over 30 years, we talk in English. And I don't speak to my wife like I speak in a meeting to 200 Chinese speaking saints. I don't. I speak in a different way. I speak in a way as an English speaker does. And when you try to communicate something in the mind, like when I try to talk to my wife about situation with our children, well, the important thing is to communicate to her what I have in my mind. And she tried to communicate with me what is in her mind. Now, if I get distracted by my way of talking, it becomes a distraction. But how do you start thinking English instead of talking English? If you want to talk English effectively, you have to think English. People told me that over 40 years ago, they said, well, when you're an immigrant and you migrate from a foreign country, the first few years when in your dream, the test is your dream. In your dream, you dream Chinese. That means your thoughts are still Chinese. One day you start realizing you dream in English, then you start thinking. When you start thinking in English, then you express yourself more effectively in English. Today, do I think more in English or think more in Chinese? It's difficult to say. Sometimes I think more in English. Sometimes I think in Chinese. And, but maybe I'm just rambling, but all these challenges, very, very important to us Chinese. I'll just say one more thing and then I'll stop. Brother Lee, of course, he was a Chinese, and he learned English very, in a very disciplined way, grammar, everything. And, you know, I go to Taiwan Gospel Book Room and I see all these rows and rows and rows of English, old, musty old books. That's left over from the book room in the 50s, that's reference books. I'm sure Brother Lee read a lot of those books. And even in China, what's on his Bibles, a lot of them have English notes and so forth. But in spite of all the English that he used before he came to this country, he never spoke it. He never spoke in English. And even in 1958 when he came, 1960 when he came, he felt more comfortable ministering in Chinese until 62 when he became more and more and more altogether converted to using English for ministry. But when he did, he tried very hard. And even though his English background was so good, he still had to try consciously. And for the first 10 years, 20 years, he never tried to work among the Chinese, and so he never tried to use the Chinese language in America. And he goes from home to home visiting seekers. And there are a lot of seekers that have read Watchman Nee books and wanted to know about the co-worker of Watchman Nee. And he went and he stayed with Caucasian families. You know, the dog would come in, the cat would come in. Yes, it's not just the lifestyle; it's different. He had to learn all over again to express himself in Chinese. Some of your children grow up as ABCs. Now, they don't have a problem with language. Unfortunately, they don't have to learn it. And so, just inside this room, our ABCs are somewhat superficial in their learning, spiritual life. So their problem is the other kind of problem. Their problem is that they have no problem with communication, but they are somewhat not as grounded in truth, in learning, in experience, and so forth. So what can we do? We do our best.